Hi, my name is Nathan. I go by Peteparker, and every week I review the comic books I buy so that I can continue buying them, since that's the rule in my house. This review is about Uncanny X-Force number 7. This is the end of the story arc involving the Deathlock characters. It's written by Rick Remender, and the pencils are done by Asad Ribic. And worth mentioning are the colors by Matthew Wilson, because as it's been mentioned elsewhere, he uses a palette that's very different than you see in typical comic books. You see a lot more greens and purples and oranges than you do reds and yellows and blues, and it really creates quite a stunning comic book in general. Okay, so Deathlocks are basically heroes from the future, and I suppose villains too, who have ultimately been turned into half machine, half man type situations, and so they have all the abilities of the superhero that they are, with machine in half of their body, and they can be ordered by someone called Father, who is working from inside of the world. The world, in case you don't know about that, is the place where Weapon Plus was created. Shortly, they're the people who made Weapon X, who made Wolverine. They made a series of weapons with Steve Rogers actually being the very first, Captain America being Weapon 1, and Wolverine being Weapon 10. Phantom X is somewhere in there too, and there's a series of other ones. So it's kind of a homecoming for a few characters. The last time we really saw the world, I believe, was when we were first introduced to Phantom X in the X-Men series back in the day. It kind of showed where he came from, and that's heavily involved in this story. So I was recommended to read Uncanny X-Force a lot, and I started reading it, but I kind of didn't understand the pull with the first arc of Apocalypse and his ultimate horsemen, who we'd never heard of before, but they are supposed to be ultimately badass, and they were beaten anyway. But so because of that, I tried doing some research into finding out why Phantom X is so popular. He's basically a character much like Deadpool, kind of like Spider-Man, kind of like, well, a lot like Deadpool, except he pretends to be French, and he wears all white, and he has his nervous system is outside of his body. It's an auxiliary nervous system that he can ride around in called EVA or EVA. So I don't really understand the appeal of this character, and they've brought him in pretty heavily, especially in this part, and so I did research to find out what it was about this character. Maybe I missed something that was so cool, and I recently read his first introduction where he brings Wolverine into the world, and Wolverine finds out that he was a part of the Weapon Plus program. So all that's kind of fresh in my mind, which really helped with this story, because otherwise, if you hadn't read that in a while, or you couldn't remember it, you probably might not remember some aspects of this story, how they're being connected. It'd probably be okay anyway, but I think that made it actually better by kind of connecting that part of Phantom X's past with this situation. And this story arc has really been heavily focused on Phantom X and his past, which makes a lot of sense, because based on the appearances that I've read of his, except for that very first storyline that he was involved in, his character hasn't really developed much. There isn't much depth to him. So this whole storyline really makes sense to focus on Phantom X, talk about him a lot, and then they can move forward to another character, which I believe they're going to be doing with the next one as Psylocke, because you can see the preview here is her, and that looks like Emil Farouk, who is, I forget what his name is, but he's a psychic bad guy. So, the team ventures into the world, which Phantom X has been protecting, and they go in there to find the father, who is going to be the person who eventually controls all of the Deathlocks in the future, and who is sending them back from the future into the present to prevent himself from being killed. They go in there to find him. The idea is to kill him to prevent that future from happening, and along the way they come in contact with the Deathlock versions of themselves, which I find really interesting. The problem with this idea is it's really difficult to remember, because of the way they speak and a little bit of the way they look, that these are the full-fledged versions of themselves, along with additional abilities and hardware, I guess. So when you see the Deathlock Wolverine, it's as good as normal Wolverine with a little bit extra on top of it. So that's what you have to try to keep in mind. And I found that every time one of these Deathlock characters had somebody on the ropes or was about to win in the fight situation, I was like, why is this happening? Why is like the now version not totally kicking their ass? And it turns out that you have to keep that idea fresh in your mind over and over. And that, like I said, I think it's mainly because of the way they talk. They talk like machines. They only repeat what their objectives are, and they also look half Deathlock, which Deathlocks I've never really been a fan of, never really been interested in their role in the Marvel Universe, but I thought this was done well. It was an understandable point of view, and it was a good storyline. I don't want to say good. I want to say possible, right? That seems logical or probable. It's a little weird because throughout them going through the world, there's a lot of background stuff about the different weapons stuff, the different people who are involved in the Weapon Plus program, including Captain America. In this scene up here, you may not be able to see it, but that's Captain America chiseled in stone back there. And the idea of the world is that they can control time within there. So they've been basically starting mutants or starting experiments, and then they can speed up time so that the experiment evolves of its own nature, and then throttle it back and see what happened. So most of the world has been stuck on fast forward for a really long time. I want to say the world. So it's almost unidentifiable every time you go in there because it's so many generations of evolution happening so much further down the road. Anyway, it's all resolved. There's some good banter. Here's an example of the really interesting coloring. You can see a lot of green and orange details in there with just a bit of light blue. It's a lot different than a lot of what you find in, say, Avengers books and that kind of thing. So it's really good. The ending is a bit of a surprise. It has to do with the first arc of the Uncanny X-Force, where they killed the Apocalypse Child at the end of it. So there's more information on that, showing that it wasn't fully done, that whole part of their adventures is not even close to over. And I'm really interested to see where they go next with this. I'm hoping that the Psylocke thing isn't all that boring, because I don't really particularly like Psylocke. I'm probably one of 10 people in the world who don't really like her. But the way the team works together, and inner monologues and how they bounce off each other, they talked a lot in this book about how Wolverine was part of Weapon Plus, and Deadpool was a part of Weapon Plus, and Phantom X was a part of Weapon Plus. So they're all kind of related, and they've all been affected from this in different ways. So seeing them all connect to the same thing when they're characters you don't necessarily think of in the same breath, really that's funny, really made it more interesting. So it was very good. I enjoyed it. I really tried, because this didn't feel like an ultimate mind-blowing, crazy book, to make it a 5 out of 5. So I was thinking in my head, what is keeping this from becoming a 5 out of 5? What would have been better to make it a 5 out of 5 instead of a 4 out of 5 is what I was feeling like. And I honestly couldn't think of anything that could be done better in it. So I did give it a 5 out of 5. It's great art. It's the end of a very good story arc. And you get character development on a bunch of different levels. If you're a fan of Phantom X, which I can't say whether or not I am or not, this really puts more of his history on the table and moves him forward from being just the guy with the floating UFO that follows him everywhere. So it's really good. Pick it up. You'll like it. Try to read from the beginning of this series. We're only 7 issues in. That shouldn't be too difficult. It'll be well worth your time. Alright, you can check out my other reviews at marvel.wikia.com, or they'll be posted on iFanboy as well. Or you can just follow my YouTube account, and you'll get all the reviews I do every week. Until next time, thank you for watching.